Welcome to the screencast. I want to take you through the Green and Lebahan, I actually don't know how to pronounce it, reading on literary criticism and literary theory. It's a really tough topic. And so what I'm actually going to do is just give you some questions and some food for thought for almost when you're, to use as a guide when you're reading this. Some questions I think that will help you engage with this text. Some of the answers to these questions are directly in the text. Others are food for thought in terms of you bringing those questions to the text and seeing if you can extrapolate. So one question is, what exactly does this reading present to you in terms of what literary criticism is? And the answer to that is in the text. Like, what is the goal of criticism? And then I think we can start with a really, really important part of the text and a major concern of the text that goes throughout. And that's the idea we have text and then, right, we have interpretation, and usually we believe that interpretation will produce certain meanings, right? What the text is about, like an aboutness of the text. So the first thing this reading really starts to do is it says, hey, slow down. First of all, what exactly is a meaning? So I want you to think about this, right? Do we find meaning in the text? Do we produce meaning and bring meaning to the text? Is it a combination of those things? So this question about meaning can become very, very complex really, really quickly. The next question is, in addition to what is meaning, I want you to think about how a text means. How does a text mean? It sounds like an awkwardly worded question, and it is. But it basically is, what are the structures in place and the use of language that enables us to find or produce, or whatever it might be, meaning from a text? So if you wanted an analogy, right, if we're talking about architecture, I can say, what type of house or structure is that? It is a skyscraper. It is a building. But then I might ask, how did you build it, right? What was the technique you used? What is the foundation? And that's closer to this second question, right? And so I want you to think about those two as you're going through this reading. Now, connected to what is meaning and how is meaning generated from a text, we can look at two really important questions and concerns for literary theory, and that is the role of authors and the role of readers. When you think of the word author, I want you to think of the word authority. So do you think that meaning resides within the intentionality of the author? Do you think that the reader simply discovers what the author meant, almost like the author is the proverbial traveler who is ahead of us in the forest, who leaves breadcrumbs and we follow those breadcrumbs and we figure out the meaning based upon the clues left to us? Or is there something more complex going on? And so I want you to think about why literary theory has fluctuated on these questions and why literary theory is now more focused on the reader, and almost to the idea that we now have, like, how we had the death of God, now we have the death of the author, right? So why is that going on? What forces led to such ideologies like the death of the author? And what exactly does it mean? And where does it leave us in terms of trying to figure out and interpret texts? Next, they're going to introduce you to a few big names in literary theory. There are others. I'm not saying these are the only ones you should focus on, but these are the big three. All three of these literary theorists are going to look at our three questions, right? How is meaning generated? What is meaning? What is the role of the reader? What is the role of the author? So a good way to try to figure out what's going on in this text is to kind of see if you can figure out how each one of these literary theorists answers or addresses some of these questions. Furthermore, if we look at Eco and Barthes, we can look at a way they both seem to, a schemata they both share, and that's in terms of an organizing technique where they separate out types of texts, or they demarcate certain types of texts and certain types of readers. So that's also an important point, because that will help you answer the questions about the role of the reader and where meaning is found. All right, finally, we're going to get to Derrida and deconstructionism. And Derrida is notoriously difficult to understand. His writing is really, really complex. But if you're into things like the philosophy of language, metaphysics, many of the things we've talked about all year, once you start to break the code a little bit, Derrida is a really, really rich interlocutor for you. So first thing is a question for Derrida that I think you should be asking is, what does he think meaning is dependent? What is meaning dependent, right? And why is he starting to question Western metaphysics? So think about the connections he's trying to make and what he's trying to call into question about the connection between language and metaphysics. He likes to talk about certain binaries such as presence and absence, privileged and suppressed. What does this have to do with meaning, right? And again, he's very, very critical. He's really about the how is meaning produced, and he's very, very critical, or at least wants us to at least think about and not take for granted how meaning is produced. And I found this part of the text really, really helpful. When they're going through some of the poems, there literally is this line, how to deconstruct a poem. I would definitely take a look at that because I think it helps to show you what Derrida meant and what his approach looks like to a text. So they give you a few poems as examples. Those are very, very helpful. Finally, I want to give you some ideas that are based in Derrida's thought that I want you to at least reflect on as you're reading this. So one is, language is not constituted by reference. What the hell does that mean? Right? Language is not constituted by reference. And this is not directly from the text. This is from Derrida's, some of his writings. Words stand in for things. They don't stand for things. It's a distinction. What exactly does that mean? And then this is in your text. Meaning results from absence, not presence. Again, has to do with these binaries. What does he mean that meaning results from absence and not presence? And then this idea that meaning is not produced in isolation, but is produced within a system. And finally, this is a quote right from the text. There is no transcendental or privilege signified. So this is where you get the metaphysics, and this is where you get the language. So what do you think this might be? What do you think Derrida might be trying to say here? So these were all some important questions for you to think about. Finally, here's a link to a short a TED Talk. It goes about 15 minutes, but you only need to listen to about up to 4 minutes and 35 seconds to get a pretty good introduction to Derrida. I think you might find it helpful. So I hope this helps. See you Wednesday.